Hey class, how are you? This will be our last lecture for Thursday, April 23rd. I entitled this Making Those Connections to hopefully try to make some connections between what we have been studying all semester in this class with regard to sexualized violence again in genocide and conflict and the world in which we live today and connected to some broader themes with regard to sexual and gender-based violence in general in peacetime as well as the state of affairs in which we live today. So, I chose two relatively small readings, short readings, excuse me. One by Cynthia Enloe, who is an incredible scholar, a feminist scholar, who wrote afterward in Stiglmeier's book called Have the Bosnia Rapes Opened a New Era of Feminist Consciousness? And this is a great short chapter in the book. And she opens this chapter by saying that, we've always reported on more rape. It's not new reporting, but how the ways in which we used to report it was like it was part of a campaign of what she called murder, pillage, rape, all together in one quote. So like we would like not distinguish it from the overall conflict as well. It's just part of the normal everyday goings on in conflict and war. And that's at least how we conceptualized it, right? What was new with regard to, remember, this book talks about the genocide in Bosnia Herzegovina. So what is new in the context of the former Yugoslavia with the reporting there is that have women's organizations which truly have been concerned with the raped women's welfare, have done much of the reporting and bringing this to the world's attention. The ways in which the reporting has changed, not what they're reporting on, but the ways in which the reporting has changed and the ways in which it's framed. So by the early 1990s, pretty much in the West and globally, actually, women with the feminist consciousness have been established as journalists in mainstream television and print media. They've used the feminist analysis to cover these rapes, and they and their outlets have had much more international reach regarding the reporting on what was going on in Bosnia, right? So, also, it's important to understand that by the time of the war in the former Yugoslavia, 2 decades have already passed wherein a feminist consciousness in the West was applied to rape, what rape means, why it is committed. Particularly relevant was the feminist analysis of warfare's reliance on particular ideas about gender and the patriarchal state's control of women to sustain masculine privilege. And these are some of the themes that we have talked about throughout this class. The most importantly is the way in which it's framed. So these rapes, talking about the ones in Bosnia, are not natural, nor should rape be considered natural in any context. And when we frame rape in terms of it's just a natural occurrence, it's a normal everyday occurrence, we render it as inconsequential just because it's expected to happen. Or we also frame it as something that's easy to dismiss. It's not really important. So feminists started to make these connections between rape as a form of masculinist domination. In fact, there's a quote on page 223 I want to read. Feminists starting to make those connections between rape as a form of masculinist domination supported other patriarchal mechanisms that might on the surface seem far removed from such overt violence. And then she goes on to give some examples: sexual harassment in the workplace, women's geographic confinement, commercialized notions about beauty and sexual desire, male privilege in legislatures and police departments, women stifle literary voices. So women, feminists in particular, not just women, but also feminist men, started to make these connections between rape as a form of masculinist domination and these other more broad violence, gender-based violence things, right? And so she goes on to say that rape should be seen as a violent form of a pervasive and subtle mode of domination against women. So this domination against women takes different forms, right? And one of the things I wanted to convey in class is how rape is on a continuum of violence against women. It's not just something that's separate and exceptional. It is part of a continuum of violence against women, of domination against women. These other forms of domination are much sometimes more subtle, although for those experiencing, probably not that subtle, but it is part of the continuum of things like harassment, stifling women's voices, up through intimate partner violence, up to rape. That's all on the same continuum of misogyny, patriarchal domination of women, etc. Right. So at the same time, she goes on to say that analyzing wartime rape has also caused feminists to interrogate social structures, such as connections between racial stratification and gender stratification in societal institutions, military structures and embedded practices of misogyny, and violent backlash against feminists who question such practices. And we still see some of this backlash today when women, and particularly women, speak out against male domination of women, right? So this feminist analysis applied to wartime rape has been broadened to encompass structural violences, which we talked about if we used the term structural violence in Leatherman's book, that sort of stuff. And that's been a very important development with regard to our analysis of wartime rape. Another development has been the feminist transformation of human rights discourse, right? Remember in the beginning of the semester, we read Catherine McKinnon's Are Women Human? And how women's rights were not widely not considered human rights or taken seriously. Traditionally, in international discourse, the idea of women's rights has all too often been an idea poorly articulated by male heads of government and state that have considered such matters private matters of the state, right? And this was an idea that was sacrificed at the altar of principles such as state sovereignty being a very important principle in international affairs. But like when women have suffered violence, that has been considered just a private matter, such as if you equate it to violence against women in the home, right? Spousal abuse, things like that. That's sometimes considered a private matter within the family, right? This sort of same idea. So Enlow discusses the importance of feminist anti-militarism movements nationally and transnationally that started in the 1980s, and much of her research and other books that she has written has discussed this sort of stuff, which has been really amazing scholarship. And so how connections with these anti-militarist groups have started to be made between the authoritarian police and military state and the sexualized victimization of women. She and others, another scholar that's important, Cynthia Cockburn, has also really discussed this transnational feminist organizations and grassroots organizations that have really connected this sort of violence. So feminists concentrating on different specific things regarding violence against women started to reconceptualize what they were working on and what they were focusing on, their campaigns in terms of international human rights for women, right? So different feminist academics, activists, practitioners from all over the world started to get together and learn from each other and educate each other in international fora all over the world, right? There's one paragraph I wanted to read on page 228 and then 229, which I did not prepare. Mark the page. Okay, so I wanted to read this last paragraph. This is the last paragraph of the chapter. A post-war era in any country in a time when lessons, potentially deadly lessons, are crafted and distributed for instructing the next generation of women and men about what to fear, what to cherish, who to blame, and who to count on for protection. Human rights doctrines and policies, even those newly informed by feminist thinking, will not alone ensure that this post-war period is an empowering one for Bosnian women who have experienced rape. Beyond legal theory and international agencies, it will take women's ongoing local autonomous organizing to name and challenge all forms of rape. It will take a deeper analysis of men's anxieties about their manliness, anxieties that make so many of them open to misogyny and militarism. And if the post-war years are as lived by Bosnian women are to be an empowering time, then those of us who today are so riveted by their experiences will have to develop much longer attention spans. For the actual politics of the rapes in Bosnia will extend far beyond the peace agreement between the nationalist male elites, far beyond demobilization of the militias. When Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, once again has running water and enjoys quiet nights, the politics of the wartime rapes so graphically described in this volume will still be playing themselves out. Who will be attentive then? And this paragraph, I love this paragraph because it summarizes many of the themes we have already studied about moving forward in a post-conflict context. So this is really important to keep that in mind, right? What happens after? Okay, so our attention span is on the rapes as they're happening, but what happens after conflict? How are we going to sustain this work of eradicating violence against women, and sexualized violence in particular, right? So, what are we going to do? How are we going to make this a fruitful, transformative practice and discussion, moving into the future to kind of eradicate gender-based violence, particularly sexualized violence against women? So I think I'm going to split this up into two videos because I'm at the 12-minute mark, about 11-minute mark, but I want to, for continuity purposes, what I'm going to do is shut this video off, and we're going to move on to the second video, which will be about Elisa Van Jordan-Forgey's blog post. So hold on one second, move on to the second video, and thank you very much.